What's up everyone, Brady Fugel here coming at you again with another video, and today it's going to be another one of my favorite albums. We are talking 3 Days Grace's debut album, their self-titled record released in 2003. The very first effort that these guys put out, at least under the name 3 Days Grace, and an album that has been part of my life for almost, honestly, my entire life. I remember listening to Just Like You and Home and I Hate Everything About You when I was like a little kid. But ironically, it wasn't until I was about 17 or 18 that I actually rediscovered the rest of the album, which honestly is the preferable part of the album to me compared to the hits that I just mentioned. Because this record is just so jam-packed full of grit and raw emotion and this like murky, grungy type feeling that makes this album really stand out, especially amongst 3 Days Grace's other albums. To this date, they have just not sounded as raw and as straightforward and as unapologetic as they did on this record. Even with the critically acclaimed 1X, the album that followed this being released, that record, again, is a phenomenal record. If you saw my 3 Days Grace discography ranking that I uploaded a long time ago now, you will see that I literally could not choose between which one of these records I prefer. But this self-titled record just stands out to me because of its dark and ominous mood the entire time. And while that obviously radiates in the more, heavier, I don't want to say metal tinge, but the more hard rock type songs, it also radiates through the more somber and softer songs, the more emotional cuts. Take Me Under is probably the best example of that, just brings in such a feeling of moodiness. Now or Never is a good example of that too, and even the ballad-esque track Wake Up is a pretty good example of that as well. With its edgy and very grunge-influenced lyrics, and Adam Gontiér's belting and emotion-packed vocals in the bridge, this album is just one big cesspool of darkness and moodiness. This is one of my favorite albums for springtime in specific, especially with how much rain we get here in the Midwest. This is a perfect album to listen to on just a gloomy, dark, rainy day. Every single one of these songs on this album fits that scenery beautifully. And with these videos, I try to kind of keep my explanations about why I like this album more on the personal side, but going on a more wide scope here, I also believe this is really one of the first forerunning albums of the post-grunge movement, which was obviously pioneered by Creed and Nickelback, but 3 Days Grace with this album really pushed the boundaries a bit in multiple different ways. But for one, bringing back the edgier lyrics. The production on this album is also a lot more pristine and clean sounding than the bands I just mentioned, at least their early work. And to this day, I Hate Everything About You is still 3 Days Grace's biggest hit. And although it may be seen as a butt rock anthem or a divorced dad rock anthem, as they call it now, it's still a great song. I mean, that opening chord progression is super catchy. It has some very obviously meaningful lyrics and showcases Adam Gontiér's very unique and gritty voice on both the harsher side and the cleaner side. Just Like You is one that's a bit more on the mainstream side and one that I gravitate towards a little less, which is ironic considering I fucking loved that song when I was a kid. But it's just your straightforward underdog anthem in this alternative metal, hard rock, post-grunge genre, like we've heard a bunch of bands do. And of course we have Home, probably my favorite of the 3 hits that this album had. It's just so aggressive and it has such a great stomp to it. A very cool contrast in the verse between the eerie, quieter sections and that, again, very stomping main riff. Adam Gontier has some very aggressive vocals on here, which again, the lyrics on here, you can tell they're coming from a very genuine spot. And maybe this is just a instance of timing, considering this is kind of the emergence of the butt rock genre, as we call it. These lyrics don't really sound cliche, like at all, which is a pretty big criticism I have for modern butt rock bands and even some of 3 Days Grace's newer material. But my favorite thing about the album is just its straightforwardness. This album is very stripped down, very bare bones, in a sense that there is just distorted guitar, in-your-face drums, very groovy bass lines, and aggressive from-the-heart vocals. And that is it. There may be a little bit of production added to it at times, but this is just a very straightforward rock album. And that, along with its, again, very moody vibe and atmosphere and its inspired lyrics, make this album such a genuine feeling album to listen to. And I know I just singled out the hits from this album, but it's really these deep cuts that still hit me really hard just because of how moody they are. I've already singled out Take Me Under, just that intro section and how it moves into the verse, and you get a very clean chorus and then a very aggressive and heavy-hitting bridge. The song is just pure, raw emotion. Let You Down is another really good example of that. It has a very eerie feeling in the verses, and even in the chorus too. It kind of has that break between Adam Gantier's vocals. That sort of eerie guitar line I think is really cool. Also just has a really catchy tribal-sounding drum beat to drive the verses. And the biggest example of this moody feeling that I'm talking about, and maybe my favorite song on the album, is the closing track, Overrated. Not only do I just love how fucking blunt this song is with its call-out lyrics, but just the chord progressions in this song are so murky. My favorite one, and maybe one of my favorites, if not my favorite part on the entire album, is that churning, just again murky chord progression that you get after that intro riff ends and you transcend into that verse, and then it even carries over into the chorus. It's just such a cool part. In addition to it, Adam Gantier has some more, again, eerie, moody sounding vocals that complement it really well, and then he belts on that chorus, which again is just so unapologetically in your face and is the epitome of a call out rock chorus. Drown and Born Like This also have lots of elements of this, and I would also include Scared with that, even though it is a bit more up-tempo. And Scared in particular is another really unique song on this record because it has those feelings with, or at least while it maintains that, again, up-tempo and slightly more upbeat feeling. I think that stop and go intro riff is really cool, and I also really like the slightly more emotional sounding vocal performance from Adam Gantier in the entire song, but specifically in the verses, and even how he just belts in that chorus again. These vocal performances that Adam Gantier put into this record are very, very versatile. And Adam Gantier's vocal performance on this record in particular is great. He does a great job of having that balance between his grit and his aggressive yells and his more emotional sounding, just straight up clean vocals, I guess would be the best way to call it. I also cannot leave out the album opener, Burn. Has one of the best riffs on the entire record, and again maintains a lot of these dark undertones that will become prominent throughout the entire record, and Burn in specific is a great way to start this record out. I think I have talked about every track now, but you pretty much get the picture as to why I love this album so much. And it is an album I have a very interesting history with, considering the fact that I listened to it way back when, but didn't really actually fall in love with it until, what would it be, 6 years ago now, I guess, 7 years ago? Or about 14 years after it came out. I associate a lot of this album with high school, hanging out with friends, going to track meets it would have been at the time. And I feel like whenever I had this album playing, just coincidentally, it was always like a gloomy, cloudy, rainy day. And like without even that being planned, it just kind of happened like that. Because whenever I listen to this album and I think back on these memories that I associate it with, I never ever see the sun in those memories. So maybe just the atmosphere of this record kind of hit harder on those days, but I feel like that was just a coincidence that happened. And the result is this record being one of my favorite records, tied for my favorite 3 Days Grace record, but one of my favorite records, period, to listen to on a dark, gloomy day. The vibe of this record fits that scenery so perfectly. Anyways, that's about it for today. Thank you very much for watching. I would love to hear your thoughts on this record, so feel free to comment that below. And until next time, I will see you guys. Thank you for watching. Peace.